know, our headlines are filled with stories about the increasing violence in Afghanistan, but one rarely reads about the quiet work being done by caring Americans to help educate young women in that country. Our guest, Julie Bolz, has been responsible, with the help of other American volunteers, for the education of over 25,000 young girls and women in Afghanistan. You will meet her after this word about the Camelot Theaters. Camelot Theaters are, of course, at 2300 Barista Road in Palm Springs. Camelot Theaters are the premier theaters in our valley, showing the finest in art and foreign films, documentaries, and award-winning and award-nominated films. The long-awaited motion picture about Harvey Milk, starring Sean Penn, makes the Valley debut at the Camelot, and it is one that so many of us have been waiting to see. Don't forget, the Camelot Cafe serves fine food, and the Cinema Lounge is a joy for cocktails. In addition, the Palm Springs Cultural Center presents the Certified Farmers Market adjacent to the Camelot Theaters every Saturday morning until noon, and again in Old Town La Quinta on Sundays. For more information, including motion picture information, please call 325-6565. Well, you know, before we talk about all the wonderful things that you're doing, this is our guest, Julie Bolz. You're on the cover of this magazine called Brava, and it says here, building schools in Afghanistan to change the world, and that's really what you're all about, Julie. But before we talk about that, you were an attorney, a very successful attorney. What made you change and go over to Afghanistan and live in a mud hut and all of that?
Well, my story of change is actually a little bit long, but I used to define success by good grades, good job, a good salary, good volunteer work, and I reached a certain point in my life where I no longer felt successful. And at that time, I was a partner at my firm. I was the president of the Washington chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. I was involved with a lot of activities, but I actually didn't feel too successful. And about the same time I was having this midlife crisis of sorts, one of my sisters had ovarian cancer. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you before, but I found that her touch with death really affected me. And I found myself asking, do I like who I am? Do I like what I've achieved? Do I like the legacy that I left behind? And I found that I really didn't like the Julie Bolz that I had spent years and years creating. And so I took a leap of faith, and I ended up taking what was then a 2-year sabbatical, and I moved to Africa to do something that was always on my heart, which was social justice issues and human rights issues for women and girls.
Mm. And you lived over there too, as the natives did, didn't you?
I did. I've actually lived and worked in about 70 countries around the world, and I've done just about everything you can imagine. I live in mud huts where there's no running water or electricity. I've lived in townships where people live in tin sheds and cardboard boxes, and I've lived in war zones where there are Black Hawk helicopters and mortar shells and gunshots at night. And
well, how did you get to Afghanistan? What prompted that?
Well, I actually was very much affected by 9/11. And after 9/11, Afghanistan, of course, was in the news. But for someone like myself who has social justice and human rights issues on my heart, it really was the poorest of the poor. And the United Nations actually has a list of who's the poorest of the poor, and Afghanistan led that for years. It had the highest child mortality, maternal mortality, landmine victims, homelessness. And of course, we saw all these pictures of the oppression that went on during the time of the Taliban. So it was something that really hit my heart.
Yeah, and of course, I think we all know, but I suppose it's a good thing to refresh, and that is how the children and the women were kept inside and with the burqas. I know that our Stephanie Denny, who is our wonderful production head, put one on. I don't know whether we can show it or not, but you have one with you.
I do.
And of course, everything is covered up. There's the head part, if they can show that. Oh, there she is. You can barely. It is dark, but there's our Stephanie in a burqa, and I don't know. Can they do the close-up? Yeah, there they go. And that was, as many of us know, the only way that these ladies could see is out of the little slits. They're not even slits. Little things in the eyes. There it is. Okay. Now, do you still see that over there?
I do.
Yeah.
In fact, you mentioned during the time of the Taliban, women were required to wear these burqas. They couldn't go outside. They couldn't go to school. In fact, windows were blackened, so women couldn't look out. Men couldn't look in. No laughing, no singing, no dancing, nothing.
You said if they played, they couldn't even play, the children? I mean, how do you keep a child from playing?
No, they couldn't. In fact, oftentimes what we saw is, well, of course, the children all work.
Yeah.
And we think of the victims of war being men and women, but the reality is it's kids. And in places like Afghanistan, many kids are sold off as age 7 to 9 to a man who might be 50 years older than the girl. Oftentimes the boys are sold off as a child worker or a slave to someone who weaves rugs. The going rate for a child is about $14.
Oh my. And of course you and the other volunteers, the whole idea is to educate people so that this does not continue, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Education is very much it's a building block to eliminating poverty.
How did you get into that? Because that then became your main thrust, the education part.
I actually, having worked all over the world in different aspects of human rights to land reform, microfinance, I really found that we kept on having to go back and figure out, well, what's the root cause of some of these things? How do you empower people? How do you lower birth rates and increase productivity and these things? And it all points to education. It's the building block to eliminating poverty, oppression, extremism. And the statistics show that really if you want to transform a community, you start with education.
Yeah. Okay, well, I know that when you were first there, if they were able to go to school, and it was just a start because it had been forbidden, they were sitting on the ground with no building?
Right.
Yeah.
So during the time of the Taliban, some of the kids could go to school, the boys, but no schools existed. Everything had been destroyed by 30 years of war. No teachers, no textbooks, no pencils, nothing. And so when we came in, we really started at ground zero. And it was boys and girls going to school for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And how were their parents? How were they? After all, aside from the Taliban, you have families who have grown up being taught that girls shouldn't learn and certainly shouldn't mingle with boys. Were they in the same classes?
No, actually where we are, the girls have separate schools. Yeah. Or if the girls and boys are at the same school, the girls go in the morning and the boys in the afternoon, vice versa. But we chose to work in an area of Afghanistan that was probably the most progressive in the country. Mm-hmm. They had a history of educating girls. And
from before the Taliban.
From before the Taliban, a history of women teaching. And so they wanted girls' education. And they realized very much so that if you educate a girl, you educate a family. In fact, there's a wonderful saying. It says, if you educate a girl, you educate a family. If you educate a family, you educate a community. If you educate a community, you change a country. And that's really what's been happening in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. And we really don't read about that. And the volunteers, and I know you're not going to talk about who they are or anything like that, because you said there's a bounty on the heads, right?
It is. It's dangerous to be a volunteer serving in Afghanistan these days. And my colleagues have not only been killed, but shot, run off the road, kidnapped, and so most people are fairly concerned about living there.
Right, but the thing I was going to bring out is these are all volunteers. These are not government specialists that are being paid to do this. This is just volunteers. Can you say how many American volunteers as a whole are over there doing things like you are?
I would venture that there are several hundred volunteers. Mm-hmm. And up where I am, there's maybe 50 or so.
Mm-hmm. Amazing, just amazing. And we have in here, if I can find it, a photograph of the school. It went from mud hut, and I don't know if we can show this because it's a small photograph that's in this magazine, but this is now a completed school. Right?
It is. Yeah. So we've built 15 large schools. Some of them have even 4,000 kids at them. And we've repaired about 15 others.
Okay, now this is the American Friends Foundation?
It's American Friendship Foundation.
Yeah, okay. And so is that where the money comes?
It is.
Mm-hmm.
So in the United States, the group that I've been supporting is called AFF, and in Afghanistan, it's called Afghanistan American Friendship Foundation.
Right, and I don't know if we can get the website on the screen now, but if not, we'll get it on later. I think we're going to get it on before we take a break. There it is, www.OFF, it's AFF.hope.org. Okay, that's my eyes. It looked like an O, but it is an A. Okay, we're going to return to you. We're going to find some interesting stories. One about a little girl who sneaked to school because her father didn't want her to go. But you'll have to wait for that.
Welcome to the magnificent Palm Springs Air Museum, located at the Palm Springs Airport, only minutes from the center of town, just off the 10 freeway at the Gene Autry exit. For group reservations and schedules, please call 760-778-6262. Experience the exciting history of aviation at the Palm Springs Air Museum.
Can't you hear me calling Caroline, Caroline?
Caroline! Hey, Caroline, we're calling!
You're wasting your time. She can't hear a thing.
Oh, that's a shame. I wanted to tell her about Advanced Hearing's new innovation called Anthem.
Well, you're going to have to write her a note.
Okay, here I go. Where is she?
She's somewhere in the kitchen with Dinah.
Let us make a difference in your life.
Call 760-341-9619.
Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah, strumming on the old banjo.
Watch Desert Cities on demand.
Talk of the Desert with Melinda Reed and Conversations with Gloria Greer offer candid interviews of well-known stars and interesting people from the desert and beyond.
Desert Cities on demand.
Meet the who's who of the local film fair. Find out about talented entertainers and upcoming events.
Desert Cities on demand.
Talk of the Desert with Melinda Reed and Conversations with Gloria Greer. Available 24 hours a day on Desert Cities on Demand, Channel 110.
We've been talking about the wonderful work that's being done by Americans in Afghanistan to educate. And I made a mistake. Julie just corrected me. I said 25,000 young women had been educated as a result of the American volunteers, which includes and is possibly headed by Julie, but it's really 25,000 young men and women because they're both going to the schools. Okay, thank you. Let's tell, I love the story of the little girl who wanted to go to school, but Daddy said no.
Well, I use this story as a great example of how it's really not the military that's going to change Afghanistan. It's the 9-year-old little girls of the world. But there's a story of a little girl, and I'm going to call her Pravana, who wasn't able to go to school on the first day. And you have to remember back that the girls weren't allowed to go to school. So when we built our first school for girls, that first day was a celebration. The whole community turned out. And there was great joy and hope. And people felt there was opportunity for the future. And day after day, this little girl watched all of her friends go to school, but her father wouldn't allow her to go. And she showed up at school one day, and the principal of that school went up to her and said, "Are you sure you want to be here? Because if your father finds out about it, he might stone you." And this brave little 9-year-old girl basically said, "Just don't tell my father. Education is so important to me. I'm going to continue coming." So day after day, she came to school, and then the day came, you can well imagine, that she didn't show up. And everyone dreaded this day. Well, the story is this. She had received, her father had received a letter in the mail from a relative in Pakistan, and no one in the family could read. 3 generations, no one could read the letter. And this little brave girl went up to the father and said, "Dad, I can read that letter for you." And instead of killing her, he embraced her.
I'm going to cry.
And I have to tell you, though, what was so wonderful about this story is that that story reverberated all over our district. We literally went from 420 girls to over 1,000. We had from 8 teachers to over 20. And then the next girls' school started. And then the next girls' school. And the next girls. And so it's so amazing to see, again, how these children are committed to education, that they're truly willing to die to attend school because they feel it's so important to changing their country.
All right, now the Taliban, we read, and all I know is what I read in the newspaper, that the Taliban is regaining strength. So have you seen examples of that?
Well, the
where you
Taliban, the Taliban never went away. You know, after the so-called, after the Taliban was removed from power, the biggest thing that happened is that men shaved, and they went back into public again. And so it's a mindset. It hasn't changed. It's so we have seen that all along. What's become more prevalent over the last year, though, is the aggression that we've seen yet again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I would suppose this is frightening. Laura Bush was recently on Meet the Press, and she was speaking about the volunteers and how wonderful they are in teaching the young girls, and how all of a sudden, if there's a Taliban attack, then it frightens the volunteers, and then it's difficult to get more volunteers. So,
well, that definitely happens, but I have to say, my heroes are these folks that have given up their lives here in the United States to serve over there. Most of them are extremely committed. They've lived there for many years. They speak multiple languages. They are living in the local communities, have friends there. And so that really has been our source of protection. We're there because they've asked us. We're not imposing our views, but we're actually walking alongside of them, empowering them so that they can make a difference.
You brought with you, aside from the burqa, you brought one of the shawls.
I did.
Which has a different name. I didn't name it accurately.
Well, it's called a chador, and I was saying that we live actually very different lives than the U.S. military. And for instance, the military and folks who work for the U.S. government or the embassy, they live in compounds. There might be sandbags, tents, barbed wire around them. We live in the local communities, and so we dress like the local people do. Now, in Afghanistan, I would not be showing my arms. I'd wear a long sleeve shirt, but I wear something over my head. It's called a chador, and we do this really out of respect for the people who are living there.
Right.
And so this is what I would look like. And we eat in the local markets. We eat local foods. As my family knows, every year I lose about 15 pounds from parasites. And so our lives are very different. But as a result, if you really want to get to know people and build bridges of understanding, you need to live in the communities, you need to share that cup of tea, and that's really what this group has been able to do.
All right, now, one of the things also that I'm reading, as far as the war is concerned, and because the American military does want to, or UN military wants to wipe out the strength of the Taliban, we have been doing some bombings in various, not only in Afghanistan, but also, I guess, going into Pakistan, where we've been asked not to, and civilians have been killed. And I guess there's never been a war where civilians have not had to pay a price. Does not that also affect you? Does this make the people who are your friends, who you're living with and working with and want to be educated, think, well, maybe the Americans aren't so great because maybe Uncle somebody was killed in a bombing raid?
That is a huge concern for all of us who live there. And in fact, what we've been trying to do is have the leaders in the United States understand that really the military isn't the war, isn't the answer to the war on terrorism, that you need to have these different approaches. And by having things like education or economic zones, empowering the people and lifting them out of poverty, that really is what ends extremism, and it also builds relationships with people.
We're going to return to you, Julie, and thank you so much. This has been so interesting, and I'm sure all of you want to hear more. But first, we live in a free society, and it's time for some messages that make this show possible.
Welcome to the magnificent Palm Springs Air Museum, located at the Palm Springs Airport, only minutes from the center of town, just off the 10 freeway at the Gene Autry exit. For group reservations and schedules, please call 760-778-6262. Experience the exciting history of aviation at the Palm Springs Air Museum.
Honey, could you pass the bread?
Who's dead?
Dead? I said pass the bread.
Well, you don't have to yell at me.
Well,
If you have difficulty understanding words, call today for a free hearing test to see if a hearing aid might help you.
We're located in Rancho Mirage at the corner of Highway 111 and Bob Hope. Call 341-9619.
Call Call today and let us make a difference in your life.
Call 341-9619.
You know, the finest restaurant in our valley is without doubt La Valerise in Palm Springs. And as you can see, it has the most beautiful patio where one can dine among lovely, lovely shade trees. And of course, the food is the best because the chef is wonderful. Paul Brueggemann, who is the co-owner, or the majority owner, is a most gracious host. But the Zagat Survey, which is an international survey company of restaurants, has named it year after year, including this year, the #1 restaurant here in our valley. Okay. You don't eat like that over there, though, in Afghanistan.
We don't.
It's too bad. What do you eat? What's an average food?
Well, we eat what the locals eat.
Yeah.
And so there is very little refrigeration. And so if you want some meat, so you would go to the market and there would be a cow or a sheep just hanging there. And so sometimes we have meat, but mostly it's rice and the foods that the locals grow, vegetables and fruit.
All right, now also another thing, you told me the way that you greet people in Afghanistan. There is a greeting that everyone does.
There is. They put their hand over their heart, and it's almost as if to say, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And they use the word tashakur.
Tashakur, which means?
Thank you.
Ah, okay. Yeah. All right. And so when you see someone on the street, you do that right away?
I do.
Yeah, okay.
Or actually, when I also greet people. So.
And then you go from there. Now, do you speak their native language?
Well, I actually learned Uzbek when I first came in. Where we're working in Afghanistan, it's a melting pot. It was the home of the Silk Road, and so there are multiple languages, multiple ethnic groups up there, but the language that's being taught in the schools right now is called Dari. Yeah.
And so the children, that's what they are learning.
Correct. And my teammates who live over there full-time, they speak multiple languages, which really helps them to converse.
Isn't that wonderful? It really is. All right, now you've said that although you've helped to build schools, you're really bridging understanding and other ways. So I'd like to know about those other ways.
Well, I was very much affected by 9/11, and one of the things that happened afterwards is the United States reputation really decreased rather dramatically. And I found that there were misunderstandings and misperceptions on both sides of the world. In the United States, a man would be walking down the street with a turban on, and people would say, oh, he must be a terrorist. And on the flip side of the world, one of the most watched television programs, not necessarily not in Afghanistan, but other parts, is Baywatch. And another one is World Wrestling.
Oh dear.
So our image has really been distorted by radio, TV, movies. And so as a result, part of my work has been to build bridges of understanding. This is who we are. So when I'm in Afghanistan, I talk to many schools and communities, universities, about how we live, what we eat, what we like, what we do in our spare time, what our communities look like. And in return, when I come back to the United States, I try to teach them about Afghanistan. But I have built communities, community-to-community relationships between communities here in the United States and those in Afghanistan. And we started exchanging poems, songs, dances, photographs. We even have people going back and forth.
That's amazing, really. That's wonderful, really wonderful. I was trying to remember something I wanted to ask you now. Gone out of my head, terrible. But aside from that, oh, I know, the water. The thing that I've heard, the criticism that I have often heard about the United States is we went into Afghanistan, we were able to rid the country of the power of the Taliban. And then we were going to build roads, and we were going to bring in water, and we were going to bring electricity, and do all of the things that are so needed. But we have failed to do that. What is the true story?
There actually has been a huge amount of change that's occurred in Afghanistan. In fact, every time I go back, I'm flabbergasted by the amount of businesses that have started and the roads that have been built. But everything was destroyed by the war. So as a result, we really started at zero. Yeah. But what we've seen is that the United States has made more pledges than it actually has fulfilled. And so a lot of the gap actually has been filled by volunteer organizations, these private NGOs. But one of the things I wanted to share with you is that we have seen a dramatic change as well in these communities because of the efforts that groups in America have made. When I used to, well, a couple of years ago, in fact, I interviewed some girls, and I wanted to know, was it working? Did education really make a difference? And there were 3 girls I just loved, and one said, when I grow up, I want to be a teacher because I want to make sure that more than the Quran is taught in the schools, and we have history and geography and other languages.
Wonderful. You know, we are practically at Christmas, and you who are watching can also help. So maybe we can flash on very fast before I say bye-bye that website again, and I'll let you repeat how people can get in touch and help.
So AFFHope.org.
AFFHope.org. Okay. Thank you so very much. And to all of you, don't forget when you have a wonderful Christmas that there are people in Afghanistan that need your help. And there are poor people here too. We know that, and we want to help those as well. And sometime I'll have to have you back and see why you're helping overseas rather than here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope you'll be back with us next time right here on Time Warner Desert Cities 111. And also don't forget that you can see this show and any show that you may have missed, that each show runs for 1 month on Desert Cities On Demand, and that is Time Warner Cable 110. So please be back with us next time.